I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of the UAI Education Committee. Of course, this will be recorded and published to the public. So if you do not like your image being used for the records, please turn off your camera, which I will do because I'll be blowing my nose regularly. And if you want to speak off the record, just let us know, and then we'll edit your part out before posting it. So thank you. Up to you, Judy.
Thank you, Sam. I would like to apologize to all those who were here last week because I forgot to introduce you our friend Gaetan. So to correct my mistake, I want to tell you that Gaetan is a reader of Urantia Book since 1979. He participates in a study group for the first time in 1987, and from that experience, he started 2 study groups in 1999. He was president of his local, national, and international association, and is now chair of the study groups committee of Urantia Association International and of his local association. He believes that study groups are the place where we can learn how to integrate the teachings of the Urantia Book and become, in our own ways, teachers ourselves. So thank you, Gaetan, for your willingness to serve all of us. Welcome. Thank you very much, Gaetan.
Thank you, Jenny. Anyone want to do a short prayer before we start? And one volunteer to do a short prayer before we start. So, Sandra, you want to do a prayer?
I can do the prayer. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Let's close our eyes for a moment. Beloved Father, beloved Mother, we are thankful for this gathering, and we ask you for your love, your inspiration, and your insight to whatever we learn in this gathering from each other, that we are able to bring that to our daily lives. Amen.
Thank you, Sandra. This is the second period, for the second session of a team, which is to introduce teachers and leaders as the teaching of the Urantia Book is teaching us how to be. So last week we did cover the publication mandate in paper 140, chapter 4, which is the Sermon of the Mount to the Apostle, but the aftermath that they explained exactly what it was. And in it, there are qualities that are enumerated that the apostles should have in order to become better teachers. And I guess they were a little bit like us at the beginning, you know, before we found the book, or some of us anyway, ignorant of how to teach, ignorant of the influence we have around us, but willing to go ahead and help change this world. And I don't know if you're a bit like me. The idea why we found the Urantia Book, I think, is more important how we found it and how many years we've been reading it. And I believe that tells a lot about us. This is what I said last week. And I think some of us, and probably most of us, our desire to find the Urantia Book or to find truths wherever we could find it was because we wanted to make a difference in this world. And I think by becoming better ourselves, better example to the world that live around us, we become, in fact, teacher by example. And one of the qualities that really impressed me about Jesus, it was always what he was teaching. he was never asking his apostle or his followers to become something that he was not. And Jesus had many qualities. If you read the personality of Jesus, I could have chosen that chapter, but I'll leave that to maybe someone else. We find that, when he has those qualities and we look at ourselves, we have a lot of work to do anyway. I have a lot of work to do. And I'm really impressed by who was Jesus. And I wish I could have, sometimes I wish I could have been one of his apostles to follow him around and to be in touch with such a beautiful human being. And when I think about it, every time I read those chapters, I've got a lot of emotion of, I don't know if we can call it loving emotion or admiration towards that human being, because at first he was a human. And this is what I had struggled with many years. I used to tell myself, well, he was a son of God, he was divinity. But they tell us in the Urantia Book that all through most of his life, he was just a human like us. So if he was able to reach that spiritual height, where he was near, well, I guess when he was baptized, he could have fused, but he could not fuse technically because of who he is. But he had gained this status of fusion. And I think this is one thing we should be striving for in our life, to become a better human being, to become like him. And not talk about him all the time, because depending on the country where you live in, teaching about Jesus might be different. Some place they will accept more people to talk about Jesus, but where I come from, if you mention the word of Jesus, people will be very fast in judging you, and they will categorize you as a Jesus freak. So we have to be careful how we teach. We have to teach those truths that are important to society. And the truth are a little bit like the ingredient we put in bread to have the bread lift up. I can't remember what, yeast. I think we are the sower of that yeast. And this is what we need to learn as teachers, to become better sowers of that yeast, those truths that will one day make it more so prevalent in our world that people will accept freely the Urantia Book as a book where truths can be found. And last week when we read about the publication mandate, in the publication mandate it says that the book was given to those who are ready for it. And I want to specify again that for those who are ready for it doesn't mean we're chosen people or we are special. We are ready for it because we're the ones, by choice. We wanted to know more about truths in this world. We wanted to make a difference, whether in ourselves or in the world at large. So we're not exactly what I would call special people. I've seen people that thought they were special, and they always brought a lot of disaster around them, a lot of conflict. So we're not special. We're just people that want to know more about God. We love God, and we want people to know about it. And in Urantia Book somewhere it says, when they look at us, they say, we only recognize two types of people, the one who know God and the one who don't. And as teacher, we need to try to get those that don't know God to know God. And there's another place I remember, I couldn't find the passage where it says, once you know that you have saved, stop working on your own salvation and start working on the salvation of others. And this is the role of teacher. So in my lesson today, in my session today, I chose paper 159, chapter 3, because it's called about believers and teachers. And this is a discourse that Jesus gave to his apostle one night. And there's a lot of good counseling in that chapter. And I would like for someone to read it to start our own session. So let me share my screen. So I'm going to have someone to read this. Let's see, which one is it? So would there be a volunteer to read that paper? Who?
I'd like to read.
Okay, go ahead, Marjorie.
Instructions for Teachers and Believers. At Edrei, where Thomas and his associates labored, Jesus spent a day and a night, and in the course of the evening's discussion gave expression to the principles which should guide those who preach truth and which should activate all who teach the gospel of the kingdom. Summarized and restated in modern phraseology, Jesus taught, always respect the personality of man. Never should a righteous cause be promoted by force. Spiritual victories can be won only by spiritual power. This injunction against the employment of material influences refers to psychic force as well as to physical force. Overpowering arguments and mental superiority are not to be employed to coerce men and women into the kingdom. Man's mind is not to be crushed by the mere weight of logic or overawed by shrewd eloquence. While emotion as a factor in human decisions cannot be wholly eliminated, it should not be directly appealed to in the teachings of those who would advance the cause of the kingdom. Make your appeals directly to the divine spirit that dwells within the minds of men. Do not appeal to fear, pity, or mere sentiment. In appealing to men, be fair, exercise self-control, and exhibit due restraint. Show proper respect for the personalities of your pupils. Remember that I have said, behold, I stand at the door and knock, and if any man will open, I will come in. In bringing man into the kingdom, do not lessen or destroy their self-respect. While overmuch self-respect may destroy proper humility and end in pride, conceit, and arrogance, the loss of self-respect often ends in paralysis of the will. It is the purpose of this gospel to restore self-respect to those who have lost it and to restrain it in those who have it. Make not the mistake of only condemning the wrongs in the lives of your pupils. Remember also to accord generous recognition for the most praiseworthy things in their lives. Forget not that I will stop at nothing to restore self-respect to those who have lost it and who really desire to regain it. Take care that you do not wound the self-respect of timid and fearful souls. Do not indulge in sarcasm at the expense of my simple-minded brethren. Be not cynical with my fear-ridden children. Idleness is destructive of self-respect. Therefore, admonish your brethren ever to keep busy at their chosen tasks and put forth every effort to secure work for those who find themselves without employment. Never be guilty of such unworthy tactics as endeavoring to frighten men and women into the kingdom. A loving father does not frighten his children into yielding obedience to his requirements. Sometime the children of the kingdom will realize that strong feelings of emotion are not equivalent to the leadings of the divine spirit. To be strongly and strangely impressed to do something or to go to a certain place does not necessarily mean that such impulses are the leadings of the indwelling spirit. Forewarn all believers regarding the fringe of conflict which must be traversed by all who pass from the life as it is lived in the flesh to the higher life as it is lived in the spirit. To those who live quite wholly within either realm, there is little conflict or confusion. but all are doomed to experience more or less uncertainty during the times of transition between the two levels of living. In entering the kingdom, you cannot escape its responsibilities or avoid its obligations, but remember, the gospel yoke is easy and the burden of truth is light. The world is filled with hungry souls who famish in the very presence of the bread of life. Men die searching for the very God who lives within them. Men seek for the treasures of the kingdom with yearning hearts and weary feet when they are all within the immediate grasp of living faith. Faith is to religion what sails are to the ship. It is an addition of power, not an added burden of life. There is but one struggle for those who enter the kingdom, and that is to fight the good fight of faith. The believer has only one battle, and that is against doubt, unbelief. In preaching the gospel of the kingdom, we are simply teaching friendship with God, and this fellowship will appeal alike to men and women in that both will find that which most truly satisfies their characteristic longings and ideals. Tell my children that I am not only tender of their feelings and patient with their frailties, but that I am also ruthless with sin and intolerant of iniquity. I am indeed meek and humble in the presence of my Father, but I am equally and relentlessly inexorable where there is deliberate evildoing and sinful rebellion against the will of my Father in heaven. You shall not portray your teacher as a man of sorrows. Future generations shall know also the radiance of our joy, the buoyance of goodwill, and the inspiration of our good humor. We proclaim a message of good news, which is infectious in its transforming power. Our religion is throbbing with new life and new meanings. Those who accept this teaching are filled with joy, and in their hearts are constrained to rejoice evermore. Increasing happiness is always the experience of all who are certain about God. Teach all believers to avoid leaning upon the insecure props of false sympathy. You cannot develop strong character out of the indulgence of self-pity. Honest endeavor to avoid the deceptive influences of mere fellowship in misery. Extend sympathy to the brave and courageous while you withhold overmuch pity for those cowardly souls who only half-heartedly stand up before the trials of living. Offer not consolation to those who lie down before their troubles without a struggle. Sympathize not with your fellows merely that they may sympathize with you in return. When my children once become self-conscious of the assurance of the divine presence, such a faith will expand the mind, ennoble the soul, reinforce the personality, augment the happiness, deepen the spirit perception, and enhance the power to love and be loved. Teach all believers that those who enter the kingdom are not thereby rendered immune to the accidents of time or to the ordinary catastrophes of nature. Believing the gospel will not prevent getting into trouble, but it will ensure that you shall be unafraid when trouble does overtake you. If you dare to believe in me and wholeheartedly proceed to follow after me, you shall most certainly by so doing enter upon the sure pathway to trouble. I do not promise to deliver you from the waters of adversity, but I do promise to go with you through all of them. And much more did Jesus teach this group of believers before they made ready for the night's sleep. And they who heard these sayings treasured them in their hearts, and did often recite them for the edification of the apostles and disciples who were not present when they were spoken.
Thank you, Marjorie. So we got more people that came in. That's a good thing. So I've read this passage many times. I don't know about you, and I was much impressed with this passage of the Urantia Book and the other that we read last week, chapter 140. Paper 140, chapter 4. In this one, Jesus is very clear about how teachers should go about their business. And not long ago, in fact, last week and this week, I had two persons phoning me, one coming over to my home meeting me, and they went through difficulties in their life. And both of them told me that by knowing that God was living in them, by being conscious of that presence of God with them, difficulties were not the same as it was before in their life. So I had a clear example, a living example of part of this teaching, what it means when we truly become conscious of God. So in this session today, I would like to emphasize that what we share based on actual living experience. It's important that those experiences be shared. Those spiritual experiences that we have are the ones that edify each one of us in becoming better believers and teachers. So it's important to know that Jesus in his speech, the title of that speech is Believer and Teachers. So we need to have that faith, that strong faith that make us go forward and try to teach others. So I have prepared a series of questions that I would like for you to think about and answer to the best of your knowledge, but to the best of your own living experience. It's important that this lesson be practical, and the only way to make it practical is when it is based on real life experience. It is a lot easier to understand from someone else's point of view, and it makes more sense also, because sometimes intellectuality of the teaching, can be understood in one way, but for some others, like me, I'd rather see a living example of something, that it makes more sense to me, because sometimes, intellectually, well, they might be understandable, but how did I do that? And this is what we need to learn as teachers. How do we do these things? What is it that I need to learn and to act? How did I need to do that to become a better teacher? So I'm going to share with you my screen again, and where I have written a few questions. So in this session, we'll explore, we already did that, and we will share with each other what are those lessons that are inspiring us, and what qualities we perceive that are necessary to integrate those lessons, because these are great lessons. We will also explore our service, different kinds of service can enhance in us those lessons and qualities so important to become better teachers. Finally, we'll explore how study groups can be very effective place where we can learn and practice to become teachers. So this is the goal of this session. So we will read, we already did that. So my first question to you is over here. What is for you the most important lesson that appealed to you in this chapter? And I can go question by question, but I would like first for some of you or all of you, try not to take too much time so everybody has a chance to speak. So try to limit your time to no more than 3-4 minutes by explaining, or maybe less, so that other people can read this. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Remember the question. What is for you the most important lesson that appealed to you in this chapter? So maybe you can have your book open, or maybe I can share the screen about chapter 3 of paper 159. Or maybe you can read in your book. There must have been something in there that really talked to you. So I'm going to stop my sharing. So anyone that, how did I do that now? Okay, Joy, go ahead.
the first sentence, actually, always respect the personality of man. And the reason I say this is from my own personal experience of moving from being an agnostic to choosing to have faith in God. And I had been raised in a very strict fundamentalist church, and therefore it didn't make sense to me. And so I threw it all out, including I threw out God. But I was very empty, so I was searching. And basically, what happened, I had an experience where I actually had met some people who had the Urantia Book. It's kind of a hippie group back in the 70s. And I was starting to read the Urantia Book, and I really wanted to know if there was a God or not. And I was perfectly okay with if there wasn't a God, but I really wanted to know the truth. Is there a God, a personal God, or is there not a personal God? And this group did not pressure me at all, but they believed in a personal God. And, I could tell I was attracted to their happiness in a way. And anyway, so I was like one evening reading the Urantia Book a little, and all of a sudden in my head, things started all falling into place. Things started making sense. Everything from like my childhood, things I'd learned in science, things I'd read in the Urantia Book, even things I'd learned, out of the Bible in this really strict fundamentalist religion. Things just started clicking like dominoes in a row, where you push one and they all start falling over. And it was going like, and I was like, wow, and then suddenly it stopped. And it was like there was a fork in the road of my thoughts. And I realized that I had come to the place where my thoughts couldn't go on. It was like philosophical thoughts, they couldn't go on until I made a decision whether to, what I realized was that I had to choose to have faith in God, that it was a choice. And because up until then I had thought that, well, if God really exists, why doesn't he come to me in a burning bush like he supposedly did with Moses, etc. And I realized, if anything like that were to happen, I could the next day think it was an hallucination. So I realized I had to choose whether to believe in God or not. So I thought, okay, in this kind of fork in the road of my thinking, I thought, okay, well, if there is a God, then I have eternal life, and I'm part of God's family, and we're all brothers and sisters, and I have purpose, okay, well, that sounds really good. And what if there isn't a God? Well, if there isn't a God, then my life is the most important thing in the world to me, and I might as well be as selfish as I possibly can, because I'm the only person that's important to me. And so I looked at these two choices and I went, well, this is an easy decision. And I said, I choose God, and I choose to have faith in God. And when I made that decision, I immediately felt this like assurance, and even actually a voice within my head that was like kidding me, like how you jab someone with an elbow, when you're telling them a joke. It was kind of like that. And the voice said, of course there's a God, and you knew it all the time, didn't you? And I started to think, have I known it all the time? And then this fork in the road started up again with the God choice. And all of a sudden I started remembering how I had believed in God and how I had faith as a child, and I just started off again. And I was just filled with the assurance of God. But the point I want to make is that I don't think that decision could have happened. I don't think that I could have made that decision 1 minute earlier. I think my thought process had to go through that whole thing. And so that's why I say that always respect the personality of man, because if you try to push anyone into it, if you try to get someone to move to that faith decision before they're ready, then it's not going to really stick, you know. I think I had to come to the place in my thought processes where I was able to make that decision. And so that's why I don't ever feel any necessity to, you know, I think in respecting the personality of man, you're also respecting everyone's time schedule for finding God. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you, Joy. That's a good example of how can someone, without pushing, can enlighten us, and our little truth sometimes, little words, can just push us on the brink of believing. You know, it doesn't take much sometimes. And us, believer in the Urantia Book, sometimes we give a lot too much to people, and we create that wall that they don't want to climb. So we have a good example of what it takes. So, anyone else want to share something?
Sorry, Gaetan.
Yes.
Rick Lyon raised his hand technically, and then after that was Mark.
And then Alice. Okay, Rick.
Well, I'll just share an experience that we had that is probably an example of why this is so important to know, and how not to do sharing of the teachings and things like that. There's a small church, not very successful small church near us that my sisters go to, and we go once in a while. And we started going there and trying to see if we could tell that this church needed a little help. At the pastor there was not very good and not doing a very good job. So we kind of thought maybe this would be a place for us to get in, maybe help out a bit, but he wasn't open to that at all. So, but we were there the last time we were there. They had an unusually large crowd because they had an event going on. And this pastor literally stood up in front of all the people, and he was going to do communion, which this is the first time I'd ever seen him do communion when we were there. But he stood up there and he said, "Now we're going to do communion, but I want to let you know that back in the day, in Jesus' time, that those who refused communion often were struck dead." And, you know, we're sitting there about to fall out of our chair and like, oh my gosh, you can't. And he went on about that, about how, you know, I'm not certain that, you know, that kind of thing would happen today, but I'm just telling you that back in the day that anyone who refused to take communion was often struck dead. So, but I'm not saying, you know, that's what's going to happen here today. So he called on me to help with the communion and handing out the bread and the wine. And so I did that. But half those people in that small church refused to take communion. And I was like, why would that be? First of all, from our perspective, why would someone refuse that? But he stood up there and used fear and guilt, trying to lead these people to God. And that, I think, is a perfect example of why that doesn't work. Because even though he tried to scare them into it, what he did was scare them away from God rather than scare them toward God. So it was an interesting experience. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. Clear example of using fear, especially today, doesn't work anymore. People are running away from that type of teaching. Thank you, Rick. So who was next, Samantha?
Mark.
Mark, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here with everybody and a good crowd too. It's a good lesson you've picked, Gaetan. This lesson coming out of this piece has struck me more than once as becoming a better listener. If you, as Joy talked about, and as Jesus talked about in this piece, respect the personality of man. So, and then I remember the story of Jesus telling Gaetan, when Gaetan asked why he got so many friends, he says, always be friendly to people and be alert for something you can do for them you know they want done. This is a sea change moment for me, is to become a better listener. And the proof of the pudding that substantiate is If you truly believe there's a fragment of the Universal Father living in the person in front of you, why not listen for that fragment, maybe talking through that person? And you can be the God talking to other people if you know what they need, what they want. That's what I get out of this lesson, and among other things too. I'm done.
Well, thank you, Mark. A clear example of listening to others and to give them what they need. Sometimes a very good way to have it inward in their mind. And for some of you that might have gone to the Denver conference, there was a lady there that wrote 2 books on Sacred Art of Listening. And I bought that book on the recommendation from Jeffrey Waddle during his study session that he held on Saturday. So if ever you want to know more about listening, and well, I suggest that you buy this book, Sacred Art of Listening. And I can make the title of that book with the name of the writer. I can't remember exactly her name, but I can also make you available the link to the video. She gave a workshop in Denver, and I had the opportunity of making a video of that workshop. So it's available online through the IC17 video. So that'd be a good thing for us to learn about. Thank you, Rick, for sharing that. So what's next, Samantha?
Alice.
Go ahead, Alice.
So the thing that stuck out for me was the part about how teaching the gospel is like teaching friendship with God. That it's not about handing someone the Urantia Book and saying, read everything in here. And my example is that, so we live in a little college town, and the college is a Catholic university, and the coffee shop that's near the university has a lot of like religious studies majors and priests in there. And so often we hear people's conversations, and there was one conversation that a woman was having at the table next to me, and it just seemed like she was, I mean, I just had that feeling like, well, I think that she could maybe do with the Urantia Book. And so I walked over to her and I gave her my name, and I started writing down the name of the Urantia Book. And the whole time as that was happening, I just knew that that wasn't the thing to be doing. And even like my hand started shaking, and I could just tell that that wasn't right. That was just me coming on too strong. And so it truly had me thinking that it is much better to just express how God's love affects my life and how I reciprocate that. And then I've had a much better experience where I ran into somebody who had actually heard of the Urantia Book. He approached me because he saw me reading it. And we've, for a couple of years, run into each other pretty frequently. I've just taken the attitude of spending much more time listening to him, and instead of holding up the book's teaching, just letting him see how it affects my life and being very open about that. And we actually just had our first study group with him last Thursday. So that's been a much better approach, to just focus on teaching the friendship with God instead of holding up specific teachings.
Thank you very much, Alice. Nice story. And who from us didn't at one time realize that we had given too much to someone else by trying to share the Urantia Book? I guess part of the lesson we need to learn is by respecting personality, just like Joy said, by giving only what is needed to that person and buying. So how do we do that? And you gave an example, Alice. You had this feeling coming into you, and sometimes we don't listen enough. Listening is probably an art we need to master. Listening to our inner voice and listening to what other people are saying. And in the long run, this person came to be a Urantia Book reader, and that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So, Samantha, who's next?
Paul.
Paul. Okay, Paul, you're up. You're muted, Paul. You're there?
Could you repeat that?
Go ahead.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, well, you said you wanted to say something.
Yes, okay. It's just that I don't know, this week the program keeps going down and coming back up. So I'm missing little bits and pieces here. I don't know if it's on my end with my connection or not. To me, that chapter, I guess, was my inspiration to study intensively the Master's life. When he said, "Follow me," to me, that's just a summary of some of the techniques that he used in his approach to his fellow man. What really impressed me, I think, in that chapter was his universal appeal to every class of citizens. And at any stage in the development of their own personality and especially regarding self-respect, there are many very timid souls who have lost their self-respect that could be greatly encouraged. Matter of fact, if we look back at what the Master did, most of the people that brought forth his religion in those times were those, the poor, who lived very humble and meek and simple lives, were the ones that actually, with a very few sprinkling of real leaders, brought that revelation forward into the world for what we have today. And so I guess in summary, what inspired me most in that chapter was to conduct an intensive study of the life that he lived, what he taught.
We don't hear you, Paul. Your voice is cutting out. No, he left. Sorry. Well, Paul did say some very good thing about respecting personality. So here is back in. So you want to complete your saying, Paul? We couldn't hear you at the end. Your voice was completely mute.
Yeah, the whole program shut down. It keeps shutting down and then coming up again. So what did you miss? Just the last part?
Yes.
Yeah, it just was the summary that I had given on that. So basically, that whole chapter really inspired me to deeply, very deeply study what Jesus did, how he approached people, what type of people did he approach, and the courage, the amazing courage he used in doing things that in his times were very difficult things to do, like bringing 12 women into the core and letting them come directly to him and sit at his feet at a time when the social mores of the evolutionary religions did not support that idea. And so anyway, it's basically the deep study of the techniques he employed in the spirit of the fourth epical revelation.
Thank you, Paul.
Did that come through okay?
Yes, it did.
Okay,
thank you very much. Thank you very much. So again, we're talking about personality of men, and like Paul said, you know, Jesus taught to many kinds of people, even the poor and the uneducated. And how do we approach uneducated people? You know, this is where it's essential that we don't push too much truth. Even Jesus, while he was with his apostles, taught to some of them, not all of them, certain truths that he knew others were not yet ready to receive those truths. Even when he went on the Mount of Transfiguration, he chose 3. He wanted to bring the whole gang up, but he knew they were not ready. So spiritual truth sometimes need a lot of discernment, even for us. You know, we think sometimes, we might think we know a lot, but I'm pretty sure if some truth were revealed to us, I wonder how we would accept those truths. The Urantia Book doesn't tell us everything, but enough so that we can start our journey toward paradise and teach others how to do so ourselves. So thank you again, Paul, and to have emphasized this aspect. So Samantha, is there someone else?
Yes, Marjorie.
Marjorie, go ahead,
And after
Marjorie.
that, Susan, then.
Well, first of all, thanks everybody who said something, because it has really helped me a lot. This section, like Gaetan said, has always been sort of like the call, so to speak. In other words, how to actually, you know, going about and practicing the gospel with every person that we meet. And the big message to me has always been discernment. I realize that the onus and the responsibility is mine. And I always try to remember when I'm engaged in these situations where you're moving from possibly like personal matters to the discussion of spiritual matters, to be discerning as to whether a person is even really comfortable with that sort of discussion. And some of you know that I am involved with a lot of very, very conservative Christians. And in my part of the world, it's a huge dichotomy here. You either have the people that totally have rejected pretty much all religious or spiritual things, because a lot of them came out of very conservative religious backgrounds that totally turned them off when they were teenagers or young people, and they haven't to this day necessarily returned. Then you have the group that is still very steeped in their very conservative polling Christianity. But the interesting thing that I have found, that when I go into these situations with people, and I know and feel and ask my thought adjuster for help as I enter these, that the right words, you know, will come, and my level of discernment will be sharpened. And that, like Mark said, it's to find the thing that this person really, really needs, and hopefully you can give them maybe a little bit of truth along the way. And you know, the idea that you can just go about and do good with every person that you meet, to me, is a very powerful, you know, powerful thing. If we're mindful, if we stay mindful and discerning of the people that we encounter. And, you know, like Alice, I've had those sort of, you know, where I felt like you know, early on I wanted to, like, you know, you want to throw a big blue book at people's heads, and you find out that that's just not the way that things are going to be beneficial, particularly to the person. And you don't really, you know, you're not going about doing good. And so I guess the big thing for me is discernment, trying to become more and more discernful and respectful of where a person actually is in their life every time that I meet them. I'm done.
Thank you very much, Marjorie. Well, these you enumerated a few qualities that others talked also about, and qualities that are. I met you a few times, and I've seen you at work, and I guess you do have a lot of discernment, and you are mindful of people. You have a great servant, and I saw that in your own community, how you serve others. And just like Mark said, you know, I believe that you're trying to find out what exactly they need, and to go to the needy and the sick is another way Jesus told us to go about, and to help those people where we learn to be more humble. And all through those talks that I've listened to different people, I've noticed some quality there. Becoming a better listener, have discernment, be respectful of others, be humble, be loving, and be mindful, like you said, Marjorie. So we're about half session, but this is so good that we can hear example of people sharing what they're truly going through when trying to do good to others. And this is another thing also, that while you go around, you can do good to anyone that you meet. So anyone, Samantha is online?
Susan raised her hand as well.
Go ahead, Susan.
Yes, thank you, everyone. This is really edifying. This is like the centerpiece of teaching for me. This time reading through was a little bit more impactful because of a recent experience I've had. Like many of you, for me, the skill of listening and communication are key to the gospel, disseminating the gospel. And we had the privilege and honor and pleasure of attending a workshop on what's called nonviolent communication. It should really be called compassionate communication, based on the work of Marshall Rosenberg. And we were there with a group. It was through the United Church of Christ, and they were all ministers, pastors from all around Ohio. And the basic principle of this came down to, and this is what really impacted me, is that in communicating with another person, are we trying to make a point or make a connection? And the communication methods that are shared in this thing are all about first recognizing that the initial response in communication is emotional, and right behind that is a need. And so many of you have been talking about this, is that needs, we all are human beings. Jesus was human, and at the base of every communication are needs. And if we can discern, identify, connect with that need, what the need is in the other person, we have this marvelous opportunity to work with that and move them towards an understanding of who God really is. So this first paragraph here, talking about the overpowering people and with those arguments and everything, we live in a society and in a day and age where judgment and the way that we communicate is like the opposite of trying to connect with another person. And it was interesting to see, these were people who had lifetimes of experience as ministers, and they had this huge struggle connecting with identifying what their emotions were and what their needs are in a communication, because we all picked out an experience or a relationship problem that we wanted to work on. So we were actually working on something that was emotional for each and every one of us. And it's not an easy transition. And for me, it changed everything. because now I can look at or have a conversation and be looking for that need underneath. I'm not looking to be right or whatever when I'm trying to do this. I'm looking at the other person and listening, the whole component of listening for what the emotional reaction is, what the need is behind that, and addressing, going for that. There's a whole, method of asking questions and to get the conversation going. And you can diffuse anything, any conflict using this anyway. So Jesus evidently naturally knew how to do these things. He knew that needs were at the base of all of the connections with other humans. And thank goodness we have this in the Urantia book to remind us. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, for sharing that. Wow. I remember reading a book about Rosenberg many years ago and trying to communicate better with people, but we tend to forget some lessons, if we don't practice them. And I guess the main idea here is to practice what we learn is very, very essential. So Susan, what she mentioned comes back to what Mark shared a little while ago, that we need to find out what the other person truly needs or want, and to supply that needs. And then they'll be open to you. You'll make a new friend. And I guess Jesus was a master of doing this. Now, so far we get two things that we could do to improve our teaching skills. First is trying to become better listener. There are courses given by this woman that wrote those books. There are courses everywhere, that spiritual art of listening. We need to become better listener. Second, what Susan just shared with us, there are courses available everywhere about nonviolent communication. And Marshall Rosenberg developed that technique while he had to work with a very conflicting situation involving, I think, the Israelite and the Jewish government, where they were at war with each other. So he needed to find a way to diffuse. So I guess he must have been inspired, and like some of you said, I think was, who was it? What Marjorie said, we need to pray before we approach someone. We need to ask our indwelling spirit, listening first to what's coming inside. And then we can listen better to what's coming from the other side. In the Urantia book somewhere, it says that the adjuster are all in contact with each other. So I guess they wanted us, they will want us to know what exactly the other person needs if we listen very well. If we learn, because this is another thing we need to do, to learn how to listen. And for that purpose, in the link that I shared with you last week on Dropbox, I put a document that's called The Inner Voice, written by Chuck Thurston, that helps you make discernment between what is it my own mind talking, what is the inner voice within me. So we need to become, have better discernment about what's going on within us. So anyone else, Samantha? Thank you again, Susan.
Yes, Sandra.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, everybody, for your comments. There's a lot being said. And what I wanted to underline is, Susan, I have had the experience. I work with nonviolent communication in my line of work, and it works very much. I work with the children with that. I work with primary school children and their parents, parents of difficult social backgrounds. And the thing that my own experience is also about all that has been said, but one thing is that helps me also when I approach people, when I talk to people, is what is it about me or is it about the other? What is the intention behind what I say and in the way that I say? Because I think that sometimes when we are talking about the Urantia book and we are very excited about the experience we have had with these teachings, and sometimes there's, for me, two things. Sometimes it's this enthusiastic way that I approach, that I want to share and maybe I want the other people to have this experience. But then I forget that my experience is never going to be the experience of the other, that the other person has to make their own experience. And sometimes it's also, I come back to the spiritual pride or ego, that sometimes it wins myself or some people, that I want to show myself and show that I know a lot and that I know maybe more. I used to have that a lot when I was in my 20s. I was at that time, I had the Urantia Book for a couple of years, but I had at that time a very, I used to read about a lot of metaphysics and New Age things, and I thought I had the truth under my arm, we say in Spanish. So I was approaching people in this way, and it was really the spiritual power and not other things. So I think sometimes we should also, in all the things of being compassionate with people, I think that to approach people with love, like Jesus used to do, is something that we can do a lot by connecting with our thought adjuster. I work also a lot really asking for help, and also works. I have had the experience that before I go into communicating or into talking with someone that I know is going to be a difficult talk, then I really breathe. I come to the moment in my thought adjuster connection, and it works and it flows most of the time. The words that I need to say that are supposed to be for this person are in this right moment, the right words for these persons. So I think that it also can help when we approach people, and if we don't know or not sure, should I talk about this or how do I should talk? Sometimes I come with the moments that people ask me because they know I read the Urantia Book, and then ask more about it. But then it comes, I know behind these asks or these questions, when I ask my thought adjuster, I know if these people is asking me because they want to know really more about it, or are asking because they want to, like, oh, okay, what is that? Are they curious just to know, So when you discern this part of the discernment, when you are in front of those moments and you connect with the thought adjuster, I have had the experience that it works, and it comes really the words and the things that are supposed for this person at that moment.
Thank you. Wow. It's about the other. It's not about me. Spiritual pride. We have to be mindful of that. It's not a quality. Spiritual pride can be a downfall to all of us if we're not careful. And I guess I experimented that also, thinking that I had the truth under my arm, in the first few years that I had found the Urantia Book. And then I guess we need to go through all those experiences where people reject us to finally come to our sense and use more discernment. And like you said, Sandra, practice. When you work into an environment, we can practice those skills. You become better at it. And remember what Jesus used to say. Well, what he used to do, he was always asking people, what can I do for you? It's a little bit like Mark was saying, was asking, it's an easy way to have people open up. What can I do for you? How can I help you? And Jesus was a master of doing this, even taking young child, that was a loss of bringing them back to their parents. Even helping this woman that her husband was beating up, and helping this man in return by asking him about his wife. So there's many, many, many ways we can become a better teacher. So Samantha, are there any more, or we move?
Well, Paul raised his hand again.
Paul, okay, last time, Paul, then we move on to the next. Go ahead.
That's what I wanted to say. There's tremendous potential in consciously realizing that capacity of the divine monitors for communication and the powers that they collectively have for changing the earth for the better.
Right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Paul. Yes, sometimes we do need to go back to the essential, and how do we go about that? And this is why last week I did say that I wanted to share with you a document that's probably a prelude to finding out how we can better in communication better with our own thought adjuster. And it's about learning to meditate, but how did Jesus meditate? So I put into the folder on Dropbox a document that was written by Peter Hawley many years ago, before he died, and was called Jesus' Method of Meditating. So you'll find it there. So it's very interesting to see how Jesus was meditating. And imagine, Jesus was the Son of God. In fact, he was divinity. He was going into meditation to communicate with his Father. How much then us should we go in meditation to communicate with our Father? If we're not doing the essential, he's showing us the way, the natural way of doing it. If we're not doing it, then we have a poor chance of really succeeding at becoming a better teacher and knowing what God wants us to do when we meet someone. So I'm going to share my screen, and I guess we're late a little bit, but it was so good to hear all those. Okay, I had a few questions, but I guess we won't be able to complete those sessions. So my second question, because sometimes it comes about very often, is how would you define a teacher? You know, I've had to wrestle with that question with other people when we try to help people becoming better teacher. A lot of objections are raised, like who's going to say I'm a teacher? Who's going to accredit me as a teacher? Can I go about saying I'm a teacher? You know, in Urantia Book community, there's a little bit of fear about creating a caste of priests. You know, are we going to create another type of people that will call themselves teacher, and then they'll know what to say and we don't? And I think for myself, we're all teachers in some ways. But I'd like to hear your talk about this, you know, because it's very important that we have a clear mind about what this is we're trying to do by becoming a better teacher. What type of teacher are we talking about? So I'm going to go back to stop my screen, and if anyone has idea about this, a small definition of what is a teacher, then you're welcome to share it or share your own. Okay, Sandra?
I think that the most important thing for me that a teacher should have is to be aware that as a teacher, we are also always students. When we approach people, when we are with contact with people, if they're children or adults or whatever, we always are learning from each encounter, from each approach to another person. So teachers should not approach another person in this attitude as I'm gonna teach you something and you're gonna learn, you know, like above, you know, the persons. It should be a dialogue, an eye-to-eye approach, and be open. Whatever it comes, there's always a lesson to us when we meet people, and that's always like that. It has been my experience all the time, at least. So I think that is for me one of the most important things as a teacher. And yeah, and I think also this kind of connection, to connect with people with compassion and try to understand what is behind every behavior, what is behind every person. And also, if sometimes we go, and when we teach or when we are in contact with people, we are triggered from some reason in many kind of ways. And sometimes this triggering, we connect them or we react on that, and we don't realize that sometimes when the person is triggered us in some kind of way, it's an opportunity to realize, okay, why is this bothering me inside? What is connect make this connection, because this kind of trigger always has a connection with some experience we have had in the past or as a children or at some point. And we need to work on that, able to overdo that. And so it's a give and a take with a person as a teacher, in my opinion.
Some among us are probably a professional teacher, have been professional teachers, and some are not. But I think Sandra is working as a teacher in some way, but she has learned different ways by reading the Urantia book, by trying, because to becoming a spiritual teacher, a teacher of truth, that's quite different than be a teacher in front of a classroom where you teach mathematics or science or whatever. It's completely different. It's so personal an approach. And spiritual is right at the bottom of the individual, right at the core of his own personality, of what they need, of what they want, of what they want to become. So it's something so personal that it's sometimes we need a different approach, not like a teacher in front of a classroom trying to people, here, I'm going to tell you what it is. And thank you, Sandra, for sharing that. Anyone else want to go ahead with that?
Gilles raised his hand.
Who?
Gilles.
Gilles is with us now. Okay, Gilles. And then after that, I saw a head raising his hand. Okay, Gilles.
Can you hear me? I'm on the road, so I may not have a good connection, so I apologize if you don't hear me well. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. All right, so the two things is, from my personal experience, the two most effective way that I found are one, by asking questions. It goes along with the listening skills that we have talked about so far, which is you get interest into some people. So then you ask them questions. And then if those people, by asking questions, you get to know them. Then by getting to know them, you get a sense of where they are at, where they can get a feeling about what they may need, and then keep on asking questions. And the funny thing is, in this process, particularly with people who are like who have already a religious background, they start spilling what they have learned, and they act as teachers, and they don't actually realize that this is the other way around that is occurring. It's many times that has happened, but particularly with those folks, I found that more effective than saying anything, and just asking difficult questions. I mean, difficult in the sense of pushing pushing their critical thinking. So that's one way. So it's basically looking as a student, not as a teacher. From another perspective, from the perspective of being accredited, that's what we are talking about when we're trying to compare a spiritual teacher with a teacher, like a math teacher or whatever teacher in our human society, is the accreditation. Jesus did have an accreditation. He was the Son of God, but so do we. We have our own experience. So which brings to the second effective point, in my opinion, is share personal experience of faith. True faith in true personal experience that you can relate with the experience of someone else. Again, there you are not putting yourself above anyone else. You are relating with someone else in a way that makes sense. And if it goes along with the listening, you are going to share the spiritual experience, or that experience that is along the line of what you have learned from the person, that is tailored to what you have learned from the person, and that person can relate to, and you can build upon that. And that experience, as we know, is that's faith, and it does have authority. And that's what can, in those instances, we can actually say we know, because we know by experience, not by a book, not because we have a degree, by experience, and the experience I'm telling you about. Well, that's all.
Thank you very much, Gilles. Well, that says a lot. The first thing I remember, the Socratic method, and that's been around for quite some time. Socrates lived 500 years before Jesus, and he was using this method. And Jesus was using that also, was asking questions. And if ever you want to learn about this method, how to practice as well, you can always register as a student of UBIS and become a teacher there. This is the method they use to teach. Socratic method, which is a very good method. But again, you need to be a good listener, because once they give that answer, if you're not listening, you won't get it. And the second thing that Jill said, the faith, living faith and experience. You know, then you talk with authority when you did have that experience. You cannot say, I never had, you know, like I read that in the book. It doesn't work that way. But if you say, hey, I've been through this, I know, I went through that experience, that talks very loud. They cannot tell you that you don't know about what you're not, you know, have not lived through. And I guess in Urantia Book, they make a lot of example of that. Experience can never, you know, nothing can replace real life experience. So if we want to learn something, we need to experiment it. We need to have those experiences that will make us better at it. Okay, what else? Who else, Samantha?
Rick.
Rick, and then there's Eva,
Ed was before.
Ed that was...
Ed was before, then Rick.
Okay, Ed, go ahead. You're muted.
Okay, now I got it. Yeah, well, it seems to me like Giles said exactly what I wanted to say, except I'm going to add a little bit of my personal experience, and also thank my wife Susan for such a great discussion about our ideas with nonviolent confrontation. In a way, conversation, asking questions and answers. That was what everybody seems to be quoting here. And I'm talking about personal experience. I find out when we ask somebody a question and they give us an answer, our answer, and then we start talking to them, it's really important that these are really short, abrupt conversations. Because I find out with a lot of people who get the stand after someone asks a question, after 10 or 15 minutes, they start yawning. And it's really important that we develop a friendship right after we ask these questions, so the other person is in front of us, and they're now the most important person in this conversation, not us. And I think that's the most important thing I've learned, especially since I've been working with some homeless people in Akron, Ohio. It's very important that they do a lot of talking, and sometimes this can go on for weeks maybe, where you never really get it into a real personal conversation, but you're teaching friendship with God and all these other things. And so teaching and listening, this is, I guess I've said what I need to say, so thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Well, you hit on the nail again, teaching friendship with God. How you can teach friendship with God if you're not even becoming a friend to the other? And that's a good lesson. And to make the other person important, I remember sometimes I would listen, ask question, and while the answer always, you know, my mind is rolling around, you know, finding something to say, and I guess this is the wrong thing to do. And I think a lot of us have been guilty of doing this, you know, finding an objection or finding something better to say, emphasizing. So thank you for your sharing. Who else, Samantha?
Rick, and then I think Eva.
Before, you wanted to say something more, Ed? You had to...
No, I was just thanking you is all. Thank you.
Okay, so just mute yourself, please. Okay, Rick.
All right. Thanks, Gaetan. I'm glad you mentioned the UBIS, because I was a teacher, facilitator for UBIS for several years and an administrator for a while. But one of the big problems we had in UBIS was convincing people to be, we didn't call them teachers, we called them facilitators, but everybody took that to mean teacher. And everybody's like, oh, I don't know enough about the book to be a teacher. And, you know, and we would try to convince them that, you know, one, as a teacher, you're not a preacher. You're not there to tell people what the Urantia Book says. You're there to help them discover for themselves what the Urantia Book says. And the way you do that is by pointing them to study certain topics or whatever topic of the course you would give, that you would guide them to read about that topic. And then you would ask them questions that they would then have to go research and basically teach themselves. So you would facilitate, you would be the teacher by facilitating their own discovery to whatever it was you were studying in that course. But you know, when you said teacher, people would be like, oh my, you know, kind of like what you're doing here today, Gaetan, and things that I've seen you do, you know, many times before in great ways, is to stand up in front of people and teach. And not everybody can do that. That's a unique talent, to have the nerve to stand up in front of people and do that. And very few people actually have that. But when you say teacher, that's the first thing people think of, is the teacher standing up in front of the room and rattling on for an hour or whatever. And, I can't do that. I don't know enough about the book to do that. But yet we are all teachers in everything we do. Every action that we take teaches somebody, because somebody is always watching what we do. And so, it's important to demonstrate our loyalty to God, our loyalty to Jesus, our loyalty to this revelation. And I know years ago, when I first, was at work and had discovered the Urantia Book and was trying to share it with people at work, Rick was the guy that was into UFOs, and he was the guy who was going to be on the spaceship following the comet, and people made a lot of fun of me like that. But not nowadays, because they know, after 20-some years, 29 years of being around me, they know my loyalty to this, and they know that I'm true to my beliefs. And so that is taught the people just around me, and secondhandly, if that's such a word, but that I am loyal to this, and I do believe in this. And so therefore it teaches it to people around me that there's some value in this thing. And so it's, I've been able to share it with a lot of people that way at work, just by being open and honest about, my beliefs and being loyal to it. And I think the other way we teach is by our behavior. People, that's another form of teaching, is how we behave on social media and things like that. So we need to be very careful about how we interact with people in those situations, and how to interact with people, like we often talk about, talking to somebody in the grocery store line and things like that. So that's how we really teach. And it's, those of us who have the talent or that can stand up in front of a group of people and teach, that's a great thing, and we need people like that, need more people like that. But for most people, that's not the way, that you're going to teach. You're going to teach your children. To me, first of all, that's our most important responsibility, is to teach our children. And a lot of people will often say, well, I don't want to influence my kids. I don't want to force them or give them. I want to let them make their own choice. That's fine, but that's not what a parent's supposed to do. A parent is supposed to teach their children. They're supposed to guide them in the way that they should go. So I don't like it when people say, "Oh, I don't want to, influence my kids." That's what a good parent does. If you truly believe this, you truly believe in God and have faith in God, you're supposed to teach your children that. And I guess the last thing I'll say is, a lot of times teaching is asking questions that you already know the answer to. You'll ask somebody a question, you already know the answer to it, but you're trying to help them discover the answer. So that's another way, I think, of teaching. But I guess that's it. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Rick. Many, many, many good things you said. Teacher, not preacher. We have to be careful about that. We tend to preach sometimes, and be mindful of that. Facilitate their own discovery. That's another key point there. Like you said, we know where the truth is, or what the truth is about. So we're trying to get them to that truth by asking questions, by leading them. I guess this would be a great quality for teachers, the leader, in fact, leaders towards the truth. And true to your belief, which is a good definition of what loyalty is. Be loyal to what you believe in and act like such. If you're not acting like what you believe, you're not loyal to your own belief. So you're just a fraud. And people see that very often, very easily. So we have to be careful about that. Now, one word about people that sometimes we get this culture within our movement. We go to conference and we hear people, talking in front of others. And that could be intimidating for the regular readers who cannot do such thing as, speak in front of a huge crowd. And they might think of themselves, well, I'm not that good, I can never do what they do. And I remember going to South America, people used to come to me and they wanted to ask me questions about the Urantia book. And I say, well, I got to tell you first, I'm far from being an expert in the Urantia book. I know just what I know, but I'm not an expert in all kinds of questions. And I realized that because some people would come to me and ask me questions that I didn't know the answer of. I had not yet explored fully what they were looking for. So we need to learn to be humble. And I found that the study groups are probably for me, one of the best way to learn how to teach. Because it's a small group, you don't have to stand up, and then you need to explore and experiment many ways of teaching. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else, Cassandra? Samantha?
Eva.
Eva, go ahead, Eva. And then Flores wanted to say something also. You're mute, Eva. Eva, you're mute. You're still mute. Okay, here you go.
All right. What shall I say? I retired from teaching for 30 years. And what I found in my teaching was that if you don't love the subject you're presenting, you shouldn't be up there teaching. So I'm thinking about, my subject was music. And now as Urantia readers, our subject is God the Father and Jesus. And so we've got to love that subject. And also that if I hadn't had an immense amount of patience, because I don't have any with myself, I had to show an immense amount of patience with my children. And it taught me a whole lot of things about myself. And then another thing is a sense of humor. Jesus had a sense of humor. If in life you can't look at things in a lighthearted manner in many ways and have a sense of humor, I think life is very boring and not very fun. So those are my basically 3 things to add to all of the other wonderful comments that everybody has made about teaching. So I'll end it at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Well, good quality. Love what you teach. And then when you love what you teach, you know, you get to know, if not everything, a good thing about it. You know, when we do love something, we explore, we go to the nitty-gritty stuff. Floor, please. Yes, you will.
Yes, I agree with what Rick just said. And I think a teacher is someone who makes what is possible to do in order to motivate other person to discover and develop their own potentialities, to learn and expand their own whole universe of possibilities. That's it. That's simple, but involves a lot of work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very much appreciated. So if we go back, be patient. Sense of humor. How much of us have a sense of humor? How do we develop a sense of humor? So these are some quality that we need to explore as teachers. Anyone else, Samantha?
No, that was it, except Jeannie now.
Oh, Jeannie, she wants to speak. Go ahead, Jeannie.
Thank you. I have heard today beautiful talks, beautiful feelings, your ideas, and I loved it. I want just to add something to something that Gaetan told the first day in our last mission. He said, in order to teach, we need to be what we are teaching, right? And it is the key with these divine teachings is about God, it's about our Father. He's a divine reality. And say Jesus, my gospel must become a living reality within yourselves. So we just read in the reading that made Margie that we need spiritual power to do spiritual work and to teach. This divine realities is a spiritual work. And why the revelation says that teacher must be also a leader is something important, because both concepts are linked in the teaching of the Urantia book. We can guide others, like say Jesus. We can guide others into the kingdom if we walk in the clear light of the living truth, the experiential truth. We need this inner experience with the Father. We need divine love, because this is a loving service, untired service, unbroken connection with our Father. So I love that what said Gaetan in our first session. We teach what we are. That is beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jenny. Yes, we teach what we are, and people know very well who we are. They look at us, and then there's a book I read many years ago. It says we never have a second chance to make a first good impression. So if you don't make a first impression the first time, there's a good chance they won't listen to you a second time. So be careful of that. So I'm going to share my screen again. We're far behind. I think this would have required another session, but okay, second session. I'm going to pass on those quality there. You can find this document, and it's going to be put in Dropbox so you can have a look at it. But I would like to go down to those quotes there. And here, I always respect the personality of man. Never should righteous cause be promoted by force. Spiritual victory can be won only by spiritual power. What did Jesus mean by spiritual power? You know, how do we do that? You remember he talked to his apostle about the Gentile, you know, are doing their work by claiming victory. They use whatever force, you know, whatever they believed in. And he said, we have to use spiritual power to claim the kingdom. So what exactly does that mean to you? What spiritual power? How do you do that? Anyone? Okay, Jeannie.
The Master said also in another occasion, the Spirit of Truth will be your fulcrum multiplying of power. And he said the same thing in some other way in another occasions. So I think we need to be born of the Spirit in order to have the Spirit of Truth fully functioning in our mind and soul. And this is the source of the spiritual power, because from the Spirit of Truth comes the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit only can be produced by those who are connected to the living wine, which is the Spirit of Truth, or the presence of Michael in our world. Then, if you are not born of the Spirit, we cannot produce the fruit of the Spirit, and the fruit of the Spirit are the divine love alive in ourselves, and it is our light that allows us to have our spiritual eyes fully open to see the path to God and to help others to come to enter the kingdom and also to progress in the Spirit. This is what I understand it means, spiritual power. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jenny. Interesting answer. Fruit of the Spirit, being born of the Spirit. I remember we had a long talk about how do we know. What do you say? He says, Paul, mute what? I don't see your, Bob, I don't see the whole. So, anyone else?
Well, I think he means that Paul should mute himself. So
Well,
not maybe background noises, I think. And Marjorie raised her hand.
Okay, Marjorie.
I think in my personal experience that the best way that I can exert spiritual power is by living sincerely my beliefs. In other words, you know, trying my best every day to live the gospel and to let that show through, you know, show through in the actions of my life for other people. But I must do it with great conviction and great sincerity. And you know, I love what Ed says about the person in front of you at that moment has to be the most important person in the world. And you have to recognize they're your brother, they're a child of God, and they are indwelt by an adjuster. And you know, that's my sincere spiritual religious belief. And it's my I feel that my spiritual power or force that I bring to a conversation with another person is that, you know, my wholehearted, sincere, you know, desire for good for them. And so that's kind of, I know that sort of sounds maybe somewhat nebulous, but when you're actually doing that, in my experience, I feel that my communication with my adjuster is on the right level. In other words, I feel like I'm really seeking to do the will, you know, the will of the Father. And I think this is what Jeannie was talking about. I love listening to Jeannie because she always gives me such a spiritual boost. But that's true. And you know, you have to show forth the fruits of the Spirit that are present in your life, but you do it with sincerity. And so I guess that's the best I can go at spiritual power, spiritual force.
Well, thank you, Marjorie. Again, the fruit of the Spirit. This is a question, you know, that we've been asking people around, and not many people knew what did that mean, spiritual power. Even I had struggled with it, and I have little ideas what exactly it means. And I guess you're sharing all these experiences. You said living sincerely your belief, loyalty to our own belief makes us speak with power because we live them, we know them. We've had the experience with them. So, and then wholehearted, sincere desire to do good for the others. And that's very powerful also, to do really good to the other. That speaks a lot. Thank you for sharing that. Samantha, anyone else?
Yes, Mark raised his hand.
Mark who?
Mark Kurth.
Okay, Mark.
Okay. Yeah, who's the other Mark?
Mark B.
I see. This was very fruitful discussion. I was listening to everybody. I would think, well, what isn't spirit? The corollary of your question, what is spirit is not. We are told that life proceeds along two tracks, material and spiritual. So what spirit is not is mathematics. It's not logic. It's nothing material formula or anything that we're familiar with along the material track. So if we believe that there is a spiritual fragment of the Father in living, then we have to move our mind over to seeking the Father's words as we have a spiritual relationship. I'm done.
Wow. I like that, to go around, you know, to say what it is not. That tells a lot. Thank you, Mark, for sharing that. Okay, Samantha, who's next? I saw Sandra lifting her hand. Is there someone else that came first?
Not digitally, no.
Okay, Sandra, you're up.
I think that for me, spiritual power also is to be connected with the thought adjuster. And the question would be, how do I remember this connection in my daily life? Every day, with all the things I need to do, with all in my work, by doing the chores at home and all that. And I have had a very good experience in the last time with mindfulness. Like when I start to practice mindfulness, it was about coming back to the breath and coming back to myself, my body, my thoughts, my emotions. But I think the breath is something very powerful to remember this connection with our Father. Because for me, it remembers me every time that I'm in a hectic moment, that I'm stressed, and I remember this, to come back to this moment and I breathe. I really remember, okay, I really have this part of me inside me, and it's helping me and it's supporting me. And this helps me to really go all over the day, or many times, or much more times than I used to before, because I used to meditate and make this connection in the morning and do my prayers in the evening. But all around the day, I think it's very powerful. I have really make a very huge, nice experience with this. By breathing and remember, okay, through this I can stop and I can remember this connection. Because I think it's easy to say, okay, we know all that we have the thought adjuster, but how do we put this connection into practice? And in the moments when we are really doing all things and our mind is getting around with all the things that we are having in our daily life, right?
Thank you. Well, here we are again with to the moment for meditation, self-consciousness, well, consciousness of God. I don't know, for many years, I don't know if some of you are doing this. It's true that sometimes when we want to do the will of God in our day work, when we're working, we forget about God. Am I doing the will of God? And I know that, well, many times I notice in my own mind, I'm having this discussion, perpetual discussion with God. And well, sometimes I tell myself, I need to listen to him more than talk to him. And this is what this type of meditation does. It's more like centering prayer, if I would say so. It's like being conscious of God. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else, Samantha? Or we move to the next question?
No one else.
Okay, well, I'll share my screen again. Make your appeal directly to the divine spirits that dwell within the mind of man. How do we make direct appeal to the divine spirits that dwell in the mind of man? We did talk about many ideas, that to listen to the other person, to listen to our own thought adjuster. And I guess this is really an answer to that. So in order to proceed more with these questions, I think we did answer some of this. So I'm going to go to the next one. It is the purpose of this gospel to restore self-respect to those who have lost it and to restrain it in those who have it. Why is self-respect so important in acquiring higher spiritual value? And how do we restore self-respect in those who have lost it? Any idea? Why self-respect so important in acquiring higher spiritual value? Because they say so much in that chapter. We need to restore self-respect. Why is self-respect so important in getting there? And how do we restore that in those who have lost it?
This is Mark.
Yes, Mark.
When you ask that question, I come right back immediately to the Jesus gospel. All men are sons of God. Bingo. Nobody is undignified in the presence of God because of high value. Whatever you want to take off on that, I think it links directly to that gospel. I'm done.
Well, thank you, Mark. That's a good start. And Sandra left her hand, but maybe Samantha, you see something else on that scene?
Yeah, Paul raised his hand electronically again.
So we're gonna go Paul first and then Samantha. Okay, Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, restoring lost respect is important because it ends in paralysis of the will. If it's total depression overtakes the individual and they're gone. And the revelation, this is again why it's important, is because Jesus did it. He would stop at nothing to restore self-respect to those that have lost it. And so this requires a real effort and commitment on behalf of those sincere about living a life, the life that Jesus led. I know Monty and I had taken convicts into our home for as much as 6-8 months, one person for over a year at a time. People who were on drugs, picked up hitchhiking, that were lost, had totally lost self-respect and wanted to escape from that. These are very, very intense ministries. So I think when we need to look at what Jesus did, when he found the two prostitutes, he brought them to a well-to-do person's home, had a meal, and left with the expectation that this family would help them restore their lost self-respect. And this is real spiritual power in the overcoming of extreme obstacles. And it's only capable through the supreme satisfactions of actually providing that loving service, not just talking about it. So that's what I wanted to say.
Well, thank you. That's a very, very... You were saying it. When we look at people that love self-respect, they abandon themselves. It's like they're going the wrong way. So I guess by giving them back their self-respect, they can find their way back to God because they are a son of God. Thank you. Sandra.
I think also that self-respect or self-esteem is very important to be able to receive something, to receive love. You have to restore this part of one person. A person who has not self-esteem or self-respect is not able to receive anything, and then after that is not gonna be able to give anything, because they are in this kind of lower part. And I've seen also that a lot in the children I work with. We receive children already in the young life. They have really lost their self-esteem, and to restore them really allows them to bloom, to be able to feel this kind of recognition, which is what every human being is after. The need of every human being to be recognized, to be loved, to be appreciated is only possible if the person is really restored in the full self-esteem and the self-esteem.
Thank you. Very good point about someone that does not have self-respect cannot love another person, cannot receive love. If you can't love someone else, it's because you can't receive love most of the time. Does that mean then that people that are lost their self-respect, yes, Alice, I see you're in, that they will go down the drain, like they're nearly lost, and this is why it's so important for God to restore self-respect in those, because they're on the wrong path, maybe. So, okay, Alice.
So I'm trying to approach people with more of a positive outlook about them, just assuming the best of them. And I find that it has made me more interested in them. at a time when I'm trying to become a better listener, ask people more questions, I'm happier to do so when I have come at them from the standpoint of assuming best about them. And so I think, you know, it has positive aspects for them, but also it has positive aspect for me and how I am then better able to relate to them.
Thank you. Helping people. We need to help people. So maybe that's why Jesus said, go help the needy and the sick. And who are those needy? And then they tell us not to be too much pity on the one that want to live their own life. So, you know, I've always had trouble struggling with those two concepts, you know, helping people, not to give over much pity to those that don't want to fight this fight for life. So I think we need the leading of the Spirit to know exactly how we act in this area. Anyone else? We're nearly at the close of this session, but yes, Bob, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The thrust of this course, as I understand it, is how to lead and to teach those about the Urantia book, correct?
Well, it's out to ourselves, how we can learn to become better teachers, and not to teach others, but to learn from our own experience and sharing those experiences with others.
Okay. I'm in Tulsa, Oklahoma, the heart of the Bible Belt. There are many fundamental Christians here, and I come across many of them many times in sharing the Urantia book. And there are three great faults in their belief, but I never attack their faults. The one that there's only one Son of God, the second fault of believing that Jesus died for our sins on the cross, and then the third fault is the Bible is perfect, there's no errors, everything is identically right. I've been teaching and sharing for 35 years. Last night I had another experience with a fundamental Christian young lady about 26 years old. I found it very challenging to try to share with her things that she didn't know without criticizing her current belief system. I have known many fundamental Christians that switched or expanded to become Urantia students also. It's not enough time for me to share with you my techniques I use to do this, but the point of respecting the individual and his current belief system is critically important. You find a little tidbit of their interest, you expand on that. Approaching Urantia, you can approach it from like 360 degrees. But what I try to do is find out what their interest is and who they are first before I reveal anything about the Urantia book. And one thing that we need to learn to do, and I think we're talking about this now, is to respect the individual's current belief system and try to expand on it in a positive way. I can share more of that about that later on, but thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul. And this is exactly how Jesus was doing it, expanding those truths in the mind of those that he met, never antagonizing their own belief. And I think I've been guilty of doing that, you know, in the beginning. You know, we want to use supremacy of belief on the others. Thank you for sharing that, Bob. We're at the end of our session, and that's I'm so sorry. There's so much more to explore, and I will share that document with you, and maybe I can expand on those later on. Yes, Marjorie?
Gaetan, could you tell us how to have access to your Dropbox?
Yes, Jamie can share that on the comments section, you know, where there's the chat link there.
Right. Okay.
She can share this Dropbox links there, and also the Vimeo link there to the publication mandate that I recorded with Carolyn Campbell many years ago. And once in the Dropbox, what I'll do, I'll put in a document for other links. You can access video and things like that. And you can access the document that can help you become a better teacher, like the one about meditation, the one about the inner spirit, and the publication mandate. There are a few others documented that are there to help us along the way. Some of those articles were written by teachers. Others were written by Urantia Book teachers that are Urantia Book readers, but also regular readers that wrote articles about the qualities of teachers or leaders. So there are many things that are available online. We're trying to get those documents together to help us be focused in the right direction. There's so many things out there. But, I thank you immensely for all that you have shared. I've learned many, many things. I made a list, while you were talking, I made a list of those things, the qualities and examples that you shared. I've learned many things because I was struggling with some of those questions myself. This is why I was asking them. I wanted you to teach me what I did not know. And thank you for sharing those. You truly helped me. I hope in the long run, helping others that are present here. So, Jeannie, I turn back the conversation to you if you want to say anything.
Thank you, Gaetan. Thank you for these two beautiful sessions, very instructive. I thank you also, everyone, for everything you shared, for your presence. You are really appreciated. I would like to invite you to the next session, in which I will try to represent the beautiful role that Gaetan did with my limitations. You know that my English is not very good, but my love is huge. So I will ask you your help to our next session. The subject in our next session will be, let me share my screen. In our third meeting, we will explore the different concepts of leadership in the Urantia Book and how can we prepare ourselves to serve our fellows in such capacity. We will explore, as says the Revelator in paper 195, the world needs to see Jesus living again on earth. So, how can we attain the great purpose of Jesus' earthly life? It is possible to us. Read paper 195, chapter 9 and 10. And also, I would like very much your contributions. If you, during this week, in your meditations, in your prayers, or as you want to do, think what is important to you, what is more attractive to every one of you in the life of Jesus. What part of the life of Jesus or his teachings is more appealing to you? This is what I would like we share in our next session. Thank you very much for coming, for your presence, and for your beautiful reflections.
Thank you so much, Gaetan. It was wonderful.